It's Sunday, November 16th, 2014. Crazy enough, we're in week 11 and we're back for another edition of The War Room, powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe. And of course, always making me look better, my co-hosts, Mike Clay and Pat Thorman. Mike, how you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty well. Lots going on this week. We were just talking before we went on air. It was almost too easy this week to set daily lineups, so we're going to try and talk about some of those great values this week and see if we can help you towards. I mean, the $1 million is still out there. Somebody's winning it every week at DraftKings, so we'll do our best to give you some great values this week.
As long as you guys cut us in, just a small percentage point if you win that million. But absolutely, yeah, we're going to hit that up. There's so many intriguing plays this week and lots of possibilities, so we'll hit that up. Pat, I know you're thinking the same thing, but you've been over it with a fine-tooth comb this week.
Yeah, it's almost like I've gotten paralysis by overanalysis, but I'm certainly fired up for this week. I mean, there's some awesome games. I saw a tweet this morning that it's the first time ever that there's 3 games with all teams 6-3 or better, and they're spaced out pretty well too. 4 o'clock and tonight. So, yeah, I'm excited for this week.
We got some games that Vegas likes as well. Obviously, that Colts-Patriots game. Last I saw, the over-under is at 58, which is a pretty high-scoring game. So there's a lot of potential there for DFS. There's a lot of potential in that Philadelphia-Green Bay game. Though we do see some weather issues this week with some wind and obviously some cold temperatures in Green Bay. In Cleveland, in Chicago, we're seeing a theme here, and potentially also in Tennessee, we're going to see some cold temperatures there. So something to consider, but then again, don't overanalyze these things. So we're going to get right into it this week. We have a lot on the table, a lot on the docket. Less teams on bye finally as well. So we're going to start with George's question here. 2 flex players and a half-point PPR. He's got Kelvin Benjamin, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., and Jordan Matthews. Are we seeing a theme here? Do you like your rookies? Boy, oh boy, that's a fleet of rookies there. So, Mike, if you had to choose out of them, and it looks like he also has Ellington here to choose too, so throw Ellington into the hopper. Only 2. Are you going with Kelvin Benjamin, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, Jordan Matthews, Andre Ellington? Who are you picking out of those?
Well, I'm definitely getting. I mean, we've just seen too much inconsistency from the guys behind Macklin. Even Macklin's targets him down last couple weeks. You have to imagine it's going to bounce back. So, to me, Matthews is not in this picture. I know Chip likes him. I know he's going to be involved, but he's not playing enough snaps, and I'm not as confident with his role as these other guys. So I'm scratching him off. If I'm picking 2 here, Andre Ellington's one for me. Detroit defense very tough, but very much like these other passing down backs, pass catching backs. Even if they have a tough matchup on the ground, they can make up for with maybe 60, 70 yards receiving that game, and teams will seem to do that. So Ellington should be busy as a receiver against Detroit. I'd use him. And the other one is pretty close, I'd say, between Evans, Beckham, and Benjamin in this one, but I'm leaning towards Mike Evans up against Washington. I think he's gonna be in for a big day.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring up Evans, too, because if you're, we'll constantly be sort of plugging in these daily plays throughout the day. Josh McCown, I mean, hey, last week, as silly as it sounds, these players, these value quarterbacks can put up some numbers, and you really have to like the chemistry that you've been seeing between Evans and McCown. Evans, 20 targets over the last 2 weeks as well, so you have to like that. Pat, what are your thoughts on this question? This is a really interesting one, so what do you got here?
Yeah, I agree with Mike on the scratch Matthews right off the bat. He gets Casey Hayward. That's going to be a tough matchup. And agreed that Ellington, he's a workhorse, and he's going to get it. He hasn't been averaging a lot of yards per carry, but he's going to get fed the ball. So you got to go with Ellington there. And to me, it's between Benjamin and Evans. And Beckham is going to get Parrish Cox, and you're not sure how Eli's going to do against San Francisco. But I would probably ride Benjamin just because. I do think that Washington's corners, especially Breland, is playing better than what their points per receiver allowed states. So I'm going to go with Benjamin slightly over Evans with Ellington.
I'm actually going to side with Evans. Going strictly by my rankings here, It really doesn't change that it's half point PPR, but I just like what I've seen out of Evans the last couple of weeks here. He's really emerging as that player that we thought he was going to be, being as selected as high as he was in the draft this year. Speaking of receivers selected really high in the draft, I still haven't gotten an answer to the question of what was up with Sammy Watkins' socks. But anyway, not to get all Gruden on everybody here, we have a question from Martin about Ruben Randall, a player that Mike, every week your projection seems to really like, but obviously he's not doing much with the targets. So Ruben Randall, Keenan Allen, or Steven Jackson is a flex spot. I have no information on whether this is a PPR or not.
Well, I'm going to go with the running back here, Steven Jackson. He's kind of having the season we expected. He's, they're operating out of a committee there in Atlanta. It's keeping his touches down, but it's an offense that, although they've slumped a little bit lately, he's still finding the end zone. So he hasn't been overly effective, but he's getting just enough work and scoring just often enough that he remains on the running back 2 radar. So assuming standard leagues, it makes it pretty easy to go with Steven Jackson up against Carolina. If it's in PPR, it's Osher to me. And, just because Randall's struggling, I'd probably give a tiny edge to Allen up against Oakland. But, I think San Diego, their passing game, I'd be just a little bit hesitant with them today because I think this is a game San Diego should win. They really need to come out, and they know that they're struggling. They have to come out and beat down this Oakland team. And I think they're going to do that, and it's going to allow a lot of rushing opportunities, kind of limits the passing game. That being said, just Randall's just not effective enough right now to feel confident about.
What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I agree. Scratch Randall, and he's kind of in a show me mode at this point. We need to kind of see him do more than catch like 2 passes and fall down. Keenan Allen, I really like him in dailies. He's he's super cheap, especially on DraftKings. But Steven Jackson in the last 2 weeks has taken a pretty big sizable chunk of that workload, and he does have a good matchup. And looks like Martin did say at the bottom here that it is standard scoring, so I'm gonna go with Steven Jackson as well.
Yeah, you almost have to side with the player who's going to get the touches, and if you drafted him, you probably got him at a decent value, and you're getting what you wanted out of him, so you can't really complain here. He's putting up some decent enough numbers, and he gets those chances at the end zone, so going to agree with you there. And Pat, you mentioned cheap on DraftKings. Well, I think Alfred Blue really fits that mold this week. He's bargain basement price, and obviously a player you might want to look at there. But I figured we were going to get some Alfred Blue questions with Arian Foster out, but likely to next week. I don't know if this is a little fun and games from the Texans or not, but you have to really keep hope up, especially the way he was performing, probably helping your fantasy teams out. But Alfred Blue. And Eric has a question here. He's got a non-PPR. He's got Alfred Blue, Ryan Matthews, and then Martavis Bryant, who obviously is sort of playing out of his mind right now, and really for most of that game wasn't doing anything until the very end. And he's another player last week who won a lot of people some money. But, I'm going to toss this to you, Mike. Really, I think we're going to get rid of Martavis here right off the bat. But you have Blue, you have Matthews. What are you going to do if you have that choice? Because Blue, this could be a game where the Browns take control pretty quickly and the Texans are almost immediately out of it. So what do you do if you're facing that choice?
It's kind of funny. Martavis Bryant, number 2 in fantasy points since he made his debut, and we just throw him off the table, which I completely agree with. You're exactly right. Obviously a major regression candidate. I think he's averaging a touchdown every 2.3 receptions, something absurd like that. So, obviously a guy that's more of I'm going to say, if you're being optimistic, probably a back-end running wide receiver too, but we really need to see him play more snaps. So I agree with you. We have to take him off the table. Alfred Blue, I don't see how this guy's not a borderline running back 1. Unless you just think he doesn't have the talent. But, the last time he stepped in for Foster as the lead back, he had a pretty darn good game. I think he averaged, it was 6 yards per carry, and he steps in up against a Cleveland run defense that can be beat. Jonathan Grimes is his only competition for carries and for backfield touches in an offense that loves to run the football. So I think Blue is pretty safe for right around 20 touches unless he maybe fumbles early or gets hurt and they put him on the bench. But I like him a lot. I think that Blue is an outstanding play in daily, and I think he should be in pretty much all starting lineups today.
Yeah, the one problem though is if you are a FanDuel guy, then he's priced actually probably pretty well. I think he's like 6,400 or something like off the top of my head. So that's comparable to a lot of players. I mean, Shane Vereen's 6,500, so he's right in that range. But yeah, 3,000 on DraftKings, he absolutely should be in your lineups. Pat, any difference of opinion, or are you agreeing here with Mike's evaluation of Alfred Blue?
I'm a little bit less bullish on Blue than Mike. I'm more as a back end RB2. Maybe it's those preseasons I watched Ryan Mallett, but I've got zero faith in him until I see him perform. So I'm fading Hopkins. I'm fading Andre. He's so. I think Blue, based on workload, is the choice here. You're not exactly sure how much workload Matthews is going to get. They're not going to really give him a heavy workload, especially just coming back from injury when they should be up a couple touchdowns in the second half. I don't see him grinding out the game. So I like Blue based on workload over Matthews, but I'm not quite as bullish on him as Mike is.
Yeah, fair enough. I do think I agree with you guys that Blue is going to be the start here. But really interesting with Martavis Bryant, that stat that Mike threw out there, number 2 in fantasy points since he started playing, since he assumed the job here. But hey, the year of the rookie wide receiver, we talked about this before numerous times. We may never see a wide receiver class like this again. I hope we do, but this is just an incredible year for wide receivers, rookie wide receivers. All right, so we're moving on to Austin. By the way, folks, I know some people are watching on YouTube. We really appreciate that. Remember, the only way you can get in is if you have a subscription to PFF Fantasy Gold. So you have a price reduced price. I'm stumbling over my words here. A reduced price, so you can actually get in on that subscription. Maybe you didn't want to do the full season, but you still want to try it out. Go ahead and get that reduced price subscription and get this fantasy advice to help you win your fantasy championship. And you can get in on these Hangouts. But we'll get to your questions on Twitter. Hashtag War Room, remember, and we'll do our best to get to all those. But I'm going to get to the folks in the chat first. Austin has a question for us here, and he's a tight end question. And this is interesting because Kyle Rudolph coming back, Larry Donnell, obviously maybe not what, we saw regression here. We knew a regression was going to happen, but still getting targets, still obviously on the field a lot. But, Mike, is this pretty much a slam dunk you're starting Larry Donnell over Rudolph, or is there any chance you might start Rudolph in this case?
No, it's definitely going to be Donnell here. I mean, Rudolph, it's a positive matchup, but how often going to be on the field? They like Chase Ford. He's playing well. They want to probably use more 12 offensive package going forward to keep Ford involved in that offense. They also have Red Ellison, who does a nice job as a blocker there. So, they have some options at tight end. It's not like they have to bring Rudolph in and force him onto the field right away. So I don't feel overly confident. I did earlier in the week because it looked like he might come back 100%, but it does not seem like that based on the reports lately. So for me, I would definitely go with Donnell. I'll target down a little bit, but without Cruz there, he has to stay involved in the offense, and I think you're going to see that going forward, especially with, as we mentioned, Ruben Randall struggling a bit. So I do like Donnell here, and I think going forward he remains a back end tight end 1 at worst.
And this is an interesting matchup, too. Those of you in IDP leagues, remember last week, I said start Chris Borland. Well, look how that worked out. 35 total tackles over the last 2 weeks. And he's locked into that starting spot now with Patrick Willis on injured. But he's also out there covering tight ends. And I think this is a bit of a mismatch. Borland that was one of the places where we really thought that he would struggle is in coverage. He sort of is playing out of his mind right now, but there is the potential that the Giants could go after that and really pick on him, pick on Michael Wilhoit, the 2 linebackers there in this game. So I do like that. Pat, I'm going to toss the other side of this question over to you. I think the answer to this is pretty obvious, but I want to pick your brain a little bit here because he's asking about, actually, I didn't see Joyke Bell there. So he has Joyke Bell, Jerick McKinnon, Jeremy Hill. He needs to pick 2, and Martavis is there as well. We're going to toss him because this is a standard league as well. So if you're picking 2 out of those guys, who are you picking? And then I kind of want to get both your thoughts, Mike, after Pat's done. Your thoughts on Jerick McKinnon this week in a pretty interesting matchup. So, Pat, what are you doing there? Joyke Bell, obviously, with Reggie Bush sidelined as well.
I would throw Joyke out of that as well. I'll go with McKinnon and Hill. There's a little bit game flow worry with Will. I mean, if Cincy gets blown out early, you can see them go away from the run. We saw it happen last week. But that's a chance that you kind of have to take. Hill's got the talent and a pretty good matchup against New Orleans run defense. And as for McKinnon, yeah, he's still going to be splitting with Asiata. He's going to lose the goal line. He's probably going to lose some third downs. But just as far as pure talent and a matchup against Chicago's defense, that's certainly the way to go. Bell obviously is playing Arizona, and they don't give up anything on the ground.
Yeah, I mean Hill. You have to lock Hill in your lineup definitely against New Orleans. So I like him a lot as a top 10 option. He kind of disappointed last week, but there was opportunities there, and especially with Bernard still out, obviously a great play. Number 2, McKinnon. You mentioned the Chicago run defense. I actually over the past 7 weeks I have them as a pretty decent run defense. They're kind of holding opposing running backs in check on the ground, so a little bit of a worry there. But I think McKinnon's still getting enough work, and as a receiver as well, that keeps him as Pack will say running back 2 option. Joy Bell going up against Arizona. I mean, he is not the passing down back primarily. He sees some targets, but Theo Reddick is going to do a lot of that with Bush likely out. That leaves Bell handling between the tackles up against his tough Arizona run defense. So I do not like him. In fact, if you needed a third choice here and it was Bell or Bryant, I would actually go with Martavis Bryant up against Tennessee. So really not feeling Bell in standard or PPR today.
Yeah, Theo Riddick going to get some action there, but that is a very tough matchup. And you bring up a good point, Mike. This is something I talked about this week as well. Defense is bad. Yes, they're letting up a lot of points, but last year they were historically bad against the run, giving up 5.3 yards per carry. This year it's down to 4.2. They're in the middle of the pack, so this isn't just a walkover matchup. But still, I do agree with your take here. Couple things coming across the wire here as you guys are talking. Giovanni Bernard working out with the wide receivers before the game, cutting. Obviously not going to play today, but this is good news if you have Bernard, because there's been some rumblings. Maybe this is a more serious injury than they've let on. Put him on short-term injury reserve because they already used that on Tyler Eifert. So that's good news if you're a Bernard owner. And then, Mike, I want to toss this one over to you. Dan Graziano on Twitter reporting that Rashad Jennings will handle more than 20 touches in the Giants-49ers game. What are you doing with this news? Are you taking this at face value? What are your expectations for Jennings? And then we'll get back into the questions.
Yeah, I like him. Actually, I have him at 17 touches, two catches. About particularly well. Everyone wanted to love this guy in the preseason because Jennings didn't really jump off the page. I think we were on the right track. Obviously, there were some concerns about his durability that hasn't checked out. He's obviously been hurt, but he's been effective, and he's had the primary role at the goal line overall. And then you should pick that right back up today up against the 49ers. Obviously, not a great matchup, but the volume should be there to warrant running back 2 numbers. So, just to backtrack just for a second, and maybe we'll get to this, but I want to make sure we do. If you're a McKinnon owner, it might not be a bad idea to try and do a trade this morning or something. Maybe your opponents aren't paying attention because it seems very probable that Adrian Peterson is going to be back next week or maybe the week after pretty soon, and that's going to just completely kill McKinnon's value. I mean, don't kid yourself. Peterson's they're going to be the lead back if he returns, and McKinnon's just going to go from a guy you like as a running back 2 every week to just useless as a handcuff at best. So I'd be trying to, if you're relying on him for a playoff run, I would try and find another option.
Yeah, that actually goes right into Kip. I was going to bring that up. Kip has a question about Jerick McKinnon rest of the season. I mean, obviously, if Peterson wasn't to play, and from what Adam Schefter said, it really sounds like he's going to be back pretty soon. Then obviously it's McKinnon, but in this situation here, I mean, Gray isn't very impressive at all. Pat, maybe your thoughts here in a second. Not very impressive at all so far, but he's in the Belichick offense, and they're just going to, he's going to get the ball. So in that situation, with the potential for Peterson coming back, you almost have to lean towards Gray. But Pat, what have you been seeing with Gray paying very close attention to those Patriots games?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an ideal situation, either McKinnon or Gray. Just because Gray's got the Ridley role, he's going to be between the tackles type runner, and coming up after tonight, they have Detroit, they have the Jets, they have Buffalo, they have Miami. Those aren't defenses you're going to run down their throats, and that's kind of Gray's role. So I don't particularly love him rest of season, but like you guys are talking about, McKinnon's value can vanish in an instant. So in a rough decision, you kind of got to stick with Gray.
Yeah, that's a tough situation. Just across the board. The uncertainty there is always something tough to deal with. Eddie has a question for us here. He needs two at running back. It's a PPR format, and he has his choice between LaShawn McCoy, Shane Vereen, Rashad Jennings, and Ryan Matthews. And I think probably right off the bat we're going to toss Matthews just based on some of the stuff we've already said, workload, game script, etc. But then it gets a little bit closer, Mike. McCoy in a potentially very high-scoring game. We haven't really seen that massive game out of McCoy yet. Vereen also in a very high-scoring game, and then Jennings, what we just talked about. So you're choosing two out of those in a PPR. Who are you going with?
Yeah, I think I have about 57 points in that Colts Patriots game. So obviously I'm going to like the guys playing in that game. Vereen, I think, is borderline running back one, even in standard league. So that tells you I like him a lot, and that'll push him ahead of Jennings. McCoy, obviously, you have to play every week. He's been struggling at times, doesn't do a lot as a receiver, but he's just so good. And Green Bay, they've been very good as a pass defense, not great as a run defense lately. So if there's a decent game, should be another running back one option. And again, still some uncertainty for Jennings and a tough matchup. So it makes it pretty easy for me. I'm going McCoy and Vereen.
There is a little uncertainty in that Green Bay game, though, because remember last week, obviously the talk of that Green Bay-Chicago game was Clay Matthews moving to the inside, kind of, not really, moving to the inside in the base defense, and then played outside in the sub-packages, which for an IDP perspective is my mind explodes thinking about the potential here, because that's high tackles, and that's also, I said on the podcast this week, this is a guy who could potentially, if he stayed in this role for an entire season, could put up triple-digit tackles and double-digit sacks, which is insanity. But he did very well against Matt Forte, so we'll have to see if this sticks, but I do agree with your take there. Pat, do you have any varying points of view here, or are you agreeing with this?
No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I'm bullish on Jennings going forward in PPR, but those two are prime plays this week. If I'm Philly, I'm going to run as long as I possibly can before I start having Sanchez chuck it against that secondary.
All right, Pat, we'll stick with you then. And we have the follow-up question here in the flex. Kelvin Benjamin or Vincent Jackson? Both these players, I think, consensus on our rankings for the site are very close to each other. But what are you doing in this situation here? Obviously, massive ceiling out of Benjamin, but the floor is also quite low as well.
Yeah, I know Mike's going to disagree with me because he's got VJax pretty high, but I'm going to go with Benjamin on this one. I mean, his matchup with Alford's a good one. Cam obviously looks to him quite a bit. We saw what he did even in garbage time last week. With VJax, like we said before, Breeland's playing well. Amerson's not. You're not exactly sure who's covering who at any point. And I think Washington's pass rush is going to get to McCown a little bit today. I'm actually pretty high on Washington in general. I think that they're going to maybe win by 2 touchdowns or so. So like them both. They're both borderline wide receiver 1, definitely solid wide receiver 2. But I have Benjamin higher.
All right, let's hear it, Mike.
Yeah, I'm going Jackson here. He's been biting me all year. Hasn't even caught 50% of his targets. But the good news is he's seeing an insane amount of targets. I mean, everybody's talking about Mike Evans the last 2 weeks, but he's been out targeted by Jackson both times, 40% in Week 9 and 33% Week 10, and that is massive usage. He's actually at 30% on the year, which is top 5 in the league in terms of reliance from the wide receiver position. He's just massively targeted all the time, and he's going to get it turned around. He's just been struggling on end zone targets, and we've seen in the past. Although I really don't like McCown, I never really understood the hype there. I think that he's shown willingness to throw to his big wide receivers, and we've even seen that here definitely last week. So I think Jackson's going to start finding the end zone. I still think he could score 3-4 touchdowns going forward, and it is a great matchup. And you mentioned, you think Washington's going to win by 2 scores. Great. That just means more throwing in the second half for Tampa Bay and more opportunities for Jackson to rack up garbage time yardage. I think Jackson's a pretty fine play this week.
I'd love to see more creativity. I know that creativity and Lovie Smith do not go hand in hand, but I'd love to see a little bit more creativity in how they use Jackson. It seems very vanilla so far this season. Like, the targets are definitely there, but I guess that's kind of asking too much. But still, in a PPR format, I prefer the player who's going to see more targets, and I'm going to agree with Mike here. But it's close. It's very, very close, just because of that massive ceiling of Kelvin Benjamin. But Mike, I mean, 40% of targets, that is just insane total. So certainly like that there. Also like that Washington defense. Washington's defense is not a very good defense, but in this matchup, you always play the matchups with team defenses, so you have to certainly like them there. Troy has a quick IDP question for the rest of the season, and he needs to pick two out of Michael Kendricks, Brandon Marshall, and Curtis Lofton. And why I'm laughing is because they're all top 10 guys. Don't get rid of any of them. If you do, you might as well just wrap them up in and put a bow around them and just hand them over to your league, because you don't want to do that. If they're all on your roster, as I'm taking it, they are. Just keep them there. You're essentially playing defense against your league mates by not giving them top 10 options, and you just have to make the right decisions on a weekly basis. I mean, I guess if I was to rank them, I would probably go Kendricks, Borland, Lofton, Marshall, but I don't want to get rid of any of those players. And what besides, you've seen all of the injuries this season at the linebacker position. You're in a very good situation, so I wouldn't drop any of those players. But Troy also has a running back question. And it doesn't say if it's rest of the season, so we're going to assume it's this week. He needs two running backs in a non-PPR, so standard format, between Terrence West, Shane Vereen, Ryan Matthews, spelled correctly, and Rashad Jennings. There's no extra T in there for Matthews. So, Mike, what are you doing with this in a standard league? Vereen, obviously, it takes a little bit of a dip. So, West, Vereen, Matthews, Jennings, picking two.
Yeah, this is a very tough call right here. I think these are all probably decent running back two options we're looking at here. Vereen jumps out. I think he's going to play a lot in this game. The Colts are obviously playing pretty well. Their offense scores a ton of points. New England's going to have to match that in this game, which is, since we're all expecting that'll probably be a 15-12 game somehow, something like that. But I do think this will be a shootout, and I like Vereen a lot, so I'd keep him in my lineup. The other one, they all have question marks, obviously, but I think the bigger question marks are Terrence West. Could he just end up playing behind Crowell this week, or Ben Tate even? You just don't know what's going to happen there. Ryan Matthews coming off the injury. Brandon Oliver kind of struggled last couple of weeks, but overall can play that Danny Woodhead role. Don't forget Donald Brown. He'll get a handful of touches as well. They don't have to rush Matthews into this game. So that all being said, I think I would go with Jennings. That everybody expects him to come in and play a full workload like he did before he got hurt. And keep in mind, I talk about opportunity-adjusted touchdowns. Goal line carries really allows players to get scoring opportunities. Jennings, even after he got hurt, I think it was like the third week after he got hurt, was still number one in that category, just because he was just force-fed the ball at the goal line early in the season. The Giants are right up there with the league leaders in terms of plays inside the opponent's 5-yard line. And again, they like to run the ball there. So Jennings, he gets scoring opportunities and high volume touches. So I think there's a lot to like, even in a tough matchup.
What do you think, Pat?
I agree with absolutely everything you said. I really don't have anything to add. It's Vereen and Jennings for me.
Perfect, and I agree. Those are your plays there. All right, we have a question about Cordero Patterson and Keenan Allen. So this is interesting, Mike. We have the Minnesota Vikings going up against this defense we talked about earlier, maybe a little bit better against the run than people realize, but not very good against the pass. They're giving up the fifth most yards through the air per game so far this season. This sets up hypothetically very well for Patterson here. But are you starting him over Keenan Allen in a half-point PPR league?
No, I'm going to go with Keenan Allen here. I had to scroll down my list a little bit here because I don't particularly like either of these guys. I think they're both borderline wide receiver threes. Phillip Rivers has come around to basically forcing the ball to Allen quite often every single game. And it's been great in PPR leagues. It's helpful in standard because Allen's able to rack up the yardage and and scoring opportunities, which just weren't there earlier in the year. We're going to see more of them going forward. This is a guy that scored a ton of touchdowns in his rookie season, and his target volume is up. So Patterson just too shaky for me. That offense is a mess, even though they have a great matchup with Chicago. Chicago, of course, has just been lit up by opposing passing games recently. So between the two, I'm feeling better about Allen, but not a great in either area.
What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I agree with that. Allen, he feels a little bit safer. I guess if you're looking for a major home run, Patterson might have a higher ceiling if you can kind of break off two long ones, because Chicago obviously, like you guys are saying, just can't defend the pass. But no, Allen is they're projected to score about 27 points or so. So you figure Allen's going to get involved in at least one of those. So that's the way I go. Keenan Allen.
Yeah, I agree. Inactive news about to start coming in, but we'll get to Martin's quick question here about team defense. And also, folks, I know you're hanging out on Twitter. I know you have some questions. I got it all queued up. We're going to get to them all. Remember, #WarRoom, and we will get to those questions for you. But Martin's question, he has 4 defenses to choose between. I really hope you're not owning 4 defenses, because as I said on the show this week, the podcast this week, your defense will never get hurt, okay? So your wide receivers could get hurt, your running backs could get hurt, your linebackers could get hurt, whatever type of league you're in. Your defense won't. That's prime real estate you are using on a backup defense that you don't need to be using. So in this case, Browns, Chiefs, Vikings, Cardinals. I think, guys, and I think we're probably on the same mindset here that the Browns are a really strong play without Arian Foster, with Ryan Mallett at quarterback for the Texans. Would you guys give any consideration, Pat, you given any consideration to these other teams, or are you going Browns here automatic?
No, the Cardinals have been hot, but they're just they're going up against a better offense. As simple as that. Stafford's mistake prone here and there, but I think I've said what I need to say about my opinion of Mallett. So yeah, Browns is it for me. I think I'm ranked 3rd overall.
Yeah, I have Cleveland 4th. They're my play as well. I think the other guys are probably back in number 1 defenses. I think they're all in that kind of area, but I think Cleveland really stands out.
And this is a Cleveland team that is really starting to pick. We were waiting for it, and it does take a little bit of time for potentially for teams to get a system, and Pettin's system based on that Ryan 46 defense. It does take a little bit of time, but we're seeing really a red-hot defense now, and they have the tools in place. So this could be a potentially really big week out of that Browns defense. The only situations where I wouldn't start them is if I own somebody like the Lions, where I'm not going to drop the Lions just to pick up Cleveland for a week. So, yeah, absolutely going to Browns there. Zach popped in for a quick question. He needs his 2nd running back in the league. And he has a choice between Sims, Monte Ball, and Theo Riddick. Again, a bunch of question marks in these situations. Sims not exactly sure how much work he's going to see. Plus, it's Tampa. And then we have Monte Ball. Again, another situation. While C.J. Anderson reported across the wire this morning that he is the starter. But then again, we've seen this hot hand approach in Denver. And then finally, Theo Riddick. Tough run defense, but will get some action in the passing game. This is a standard league. So, Mike, you have to pick one of those players. Who are you going with?
Yeah, and they just announced Bobby Rainey as the starter for Tampa Bay. I can't say I'm overly shocked by that. Doug Martin is out, as everyone expected. So I still prefer Sims to Rainey, and it probably pushes him ahead of these other guys. Monte Ball, as you mentioned, not the starter there, and no guarantee of what his role St. Louis run defense is playing very well. Theo Riddick, my choice is Sims here. Theo Riddick, I'm probably going to come in lower than most. He doesn't carry the ball much. I think 13% might be or 13 or 16% of the team's carries. This is max for the season, even in games that Bell and Reggie Bush have missed. He doesn't do much as a runner, and he's not going to get you. He's probably not going to bust it for a 40-yard run against this Arizona run defense. So you're really relying on just everything to happen as a pass catcher. He will see a pretty decent volume of targets, but he would have been a huge bust last week if he didn't catch that touchdown. And I think it was a wheel route where he caught it in the end zone for a touchdown. So you're really kind of relying on him to go for 5-6 catches and 60-70 yards. and that's that's a little dicey thing to do, especially against a pretty good defense. So I'm not quite as optimistic as some others about Riddick, and that kind of knocks him down the list. So I'm going Charles Sims here.
Pat, this is a tough one. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I think I like Riddick a little bit more than that, just because I think they're going to have so little success running Bell that they are just going to wind up throwing. Although Bell can catch a pass here or there as well. Ball, I certainly agree. I mean, if I'm Denver, I'm just going to give him a taste. They're not really going to need very much from him against Oakland. Kind of get his feet wet. And Sims, it's a fairly tough run defense. He's probably at about 50% of the snaps, maybe. So it's the best of a kind of a bad situation.
Yeah, I hope you're not going up against the guy who's starting like Mark Ingram and and all of that this week, because it might be tough. But yeah, it's probably going to be Sims there. Can't really like that. Mike, quick question follow-up here. And by the way, that catch from Theo Riddick was really impressive. But we had a question on Twitter from Ed. Chimed in at the very beginning of the show. Hopefully you're still watching on YouTube there, Ed, about Theo Riddick in a half-point PPR, and he's trying to decide between Theo Riddick and Ruben Randall. So this is an interesting dilemma, obviously, here. What would you do in this situation? Briefly earlier on, but is this sort of automatic? You're starting Randall, or would you give some consideration to Riddick here?
For me, it's not particularly close. I mean, again, Riddick, you basically have to look at him as a wide receiver. I mean, there's certainly wide receivers out there who see most of their work in targets, but they get a carry or two. That's almost what Theo Riddick is. I mean, he's mostly going to do his damage as a receiver. He's not going to carry the ball even as much as Reggie Bush did. Obviously, it's a possibility they expand his role since he's playing well, but again, it's not a great matchup. He's probably not going to produce much for you there. Even if he gets 4 or 5 carries, he may only get 12, 15 yards. So I would not be counting on much in that department from him, and I like Randall more. He's going to do a little bit more downfield. He's been seeing goal line targets, like it or not. If you hate to admit it, you can ignore it if you want because Odell Beckham's outplaying him, but he's still seeing the volume, and there is value in that, and I think that gives him an edge.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly getting an edge there, and we're talking about receivers here as well. And Pat, I'll toss this one over to you. We have a PPR question between Brandon Cooks and Pierre Garçon. Cooks playing at home. That should be noted. Everybody's making a big deal about it. So Cooks playing at home. Garçon in a very good matchup against a weak Tampa secondary. Who are you going with there between Garçon and Brandon Cooks?
I am pretty high on Garçon relative to a lot of other rankers this week. But I do give the edge here to Cooks. Like you mentioned at home, there's a pretty big split in his home and road performances. And Garçon is one of a number of mouths that need to be fed in a game that I expect Alfred Morris to get a lot of the ball in the second half. So while I do like Garçon, I do have Cooks just a little bit higher than him in a full PPR.
And how about you, Mike?
Yeah, Cooks or Garçon is not even close for me. I'm definitely going with Cooks. Garçon just not seeing enough volume, and he needs that volume to really produce.
Yeah, absolutely. And the dynamic ability of Cooks, plus it's a home game for New Orleans. We know it's a very different team against that Cincinnati defense that just is. I mean, it's night and day from last year. I don't know if this is. It can't be just the loss of Michael Johnson. I mean, this could be, Mike Zimmer. And the effect that this guy has on his defenses. Look at this Minnesota defense, which is basically, for the most part, a very similar defense to last year, just playing lights out. And, of course, the addition of Anthony Barr certainly helped. But very, very interesting there for Cooks. Could be a potentially very big game there for that Saints offense. Let's head over to Twitter. We got questions just lining up here. And we're going to start here. PPR Flex. We need one player out of the following. And we got 3 players here. Jordan Matthews, Joique Bell, or Sims. So interesting kind of fringe players here. Mike, in a PPR, who are you going with there? Jordan Matthews, Joique Bell, or Sims?
I'm going to go with Bell here again. I don't really like any of these guys. Sims, we're still not fully clear in his role, so I'd avoid there. I mean, Bell, I think he's going to struggle as a rusher, but he's going to still lead that backfield in carries, and he'll see a handful of targets. Maybe gets a goal line opportunity mixed in there if Detroit's able to score a couple touchdowns. So, again, I don't really love any of them. And Matthews, I know Chip likes him. I know he's scheming to get him the ball, and that's great, but you just would it shock anyone if Matthews just saw 2-3 targets today, and maybe Ertz played more. Right? It's just an offense that's perfectly content spreading the ball around. And keep in mind, right after that Carolina game, they asked their beat reporters, if you watch Chip Kelly's post game, they were asking him about it, and he wasn't really, that guy's pretty honest in press conferences, and he just completely dismissed it as, no, it was just scheme, it was scheme. Remember, Brent Selleck had a big game as well. They were trying to work, basically on the inside game against Carolina. That was where they felt Carolina's weakness was, and they really schemed to get Matthews the ball in that game. So his targets are up, and I think I'm a guy in the preseason was saying, this guy's probably going to have a pretty decent second half, stash him, but he's not there yet where he's a safe play every week, and so I think that Bell's probably a little bit of a better play this week.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense that they would have gone after that part of the defense. Once you get beyond Luke Kuechly, it's Roman Harper, and I mean, notorious over pursuer, not the best in coverage. I mean, it made sense that was the soft spot of the defense. So very good insight there. Pat, do you have any different takes there on that decision between Joy Bell, Jordan Matthews, and Sims?
No, I go with Bell as well. Hope for a couple goal line touches and kind of you got to fade Matthews in a tough matchup. What Mike brought up about seeing more Ertz is interesting. Green Bay, as far as their pass defense, seems to be a little more susceptible to the better tight ends than they are to wide receivers. Their numbers against tight ends as a whole on the season aren't too bad, but when they face a Graham, Olsen, Martellus Bennett the first time, they all had really good games against them. So I would expect Philly to get the tight ends involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming across the wire here, just something briefly to note. If you were holding out hope with Ronnie Hillman, Adam Schefter, he tweeted that this injury could cost Hillman up to 6 weeks. So obviously, this is a situation where you probably should have moved on from already. Went somewhere else. You got to trim the fat as we're getting close to the fantasy playoffs. And an injured player, unless you have an injured reserve spot where you could move him to, you're just wasting prime real estate there. So hopefully you're moving on from Ronnie Hillman. Kip has a question. Speaking of the fantasy playoffs, he already has a playoff spot. Hopefully that was a result of PFF Fantasy Gold there, Kip. But he said with regards, and he says, yes, there we go. Thank you, sir. And he says that, with McKinnon and the news, Mike, about Adrian Peterson, would you give consideration to just dropping McKinnon for somebody like Crowell, maybe Kyrie Robinson? Apparently he's on the wire there. Possibly somebody else who you might see as upside who might be available on a lot of waiver wires? Or would you stand pat with McKinnon until the news is official for Peterson?
I would hold tight until the news is official for sure. I mean, Crowell, maybe if Tate was out for a few weeks, or maybe it was only a two-headed monster in that run-heavy Cleveland offense, maybe a different story there. But Crowell is third in line, like it or not. I mean, he may get a few more carries than Ben Tate, but he was not. He after that fumble that was reversed, he actually didn't play much going forward in that game. There's obviously some concern about what his role is going to be. So he's the most talented guy of the bunch, maybe. I mean, McKinnon is pretty darn talented as well, and probably is a pretty good future. But I'd hold tight with McKinnon just in case. Hey, it's unlikely, but maybe, that it doesn't go the way that Schefter's reporting right now, and maybe Minnesota releases him. I mean, we don't know what's going on, what kind of pressure they're getting from sponsors, that kind of stuff, what their, ethical determination is in that front office. So it seems probably he's going to come back next week, but we don't know for sure. And McKinnon is, you don't want to just cut a guy who's a running back too. And just really quick on Kyrie Robinson, just not a ton of like there. Ray Ingram has just been fantastic, and he may lose some carries to Robinson, but Ingram is going to be the clear number one, so not a lot of upside there.
Finally, years of drafting Mark Ingram pay off. I just held to my guns, stuck to my guns on Mark Ingram, and finally looks like he's every bit of what we thought he was originally going to be. But sometimes these players, it takes a little bit of time, and sometimes, especially with players, Alabama players, I've noticed, coming to the league a little banged up from overusage. So who knows what it was, but it's certainly clicking now. Not much opportunity there for Kyrie Robinson. Troy, question for us. A flex spot. I think this one's fairly straightforward, but do want to mention this one name here as well. It's between Jerick McKinnon, Kyle Rudolph, and Michael. I think it's Michael Floyd, not Malcolm Floyd. And I think obvious answer is McKinnon. Who does Michael Floyd's outlook change at all with Drew Stanton in at quarterback for you? I know you're a big Floyd guy, and it just hasn't happened so far this season. Still holding out hope.
No, not really. I mean, he's getting fewer targets on a percentage basis than last year. He's running deeper routes, lower percentage routes. Sure, Stanton throws it downfield, so he'll pop for like 3 for 110 and a touchdown, but good luck, figuring out when that's going to happen. So hopefully, the only place he's really relying on him is in a best ball league. It's just it's unfortunate. A major whiff on my part on old Michael Floyd.
You got to take your swings. You absolutely do. Floyd showed upside in the past. It just always comes down to usage, how these players are being incorporated into the offense. Couple just briefly active, inactive. Marshawn Lynch, there was a little bit of rumblings there. Obviously, he's active. Brandon Marshall active, so no worries about him either. I know some people were concerned earlier in the week, but the practice reports pointed to this one being pretty solid. So that's all I've seen so far of any significance. But I do have a question on Twitter, Mike, and I think this is an interesting question, especially for us Philadelphia fans. The question is between Mark Sanchez and Jay Cutler. Obviously, Cutler struggling, Cutler seemingly disinterested at times. I don't know what we can really read into from his mannerisms, but still, Sanchez in a potentially very cold game against a somewhat tough defense, surprisingly tough defense in Green Bay. If you have to make a decision between those two, who are you going with and why?
Yeah, I'm going with Cutler here, and I don't really think it's particularly close either. I mean, the Bears have been leaning on the pass. They've been scheming to pass the ball. The Eagles like to scheme it for the run, and they've tried to do that more after starting off not in that area early in the year. I mean, early in the year they came out and tried to use Ertz more. They wanted to use more 12, get Ertz and Selleck on the field. Last year they didn't do that. They were mostly an 11 team. They've gone back to that over the last month or so, and they're running the ball more. It's kind of been a change in scheme we saw about a month or so ago. And I think they're going to continue to do that against Green Bay. A Green Bay run defense that's struggling, a pass defense that's very good. And I have you mentioned we're kind of Eagles fans. I'm not optimistic about this game. I think Green Bay is going to handle them pretty easily, and that may be a 2-3 interception game for Sanchez here. I'm not optimistic about him or this passing game. Cutler, obviously, he's very polarizing as well, and the defense he's facing is similarly good to Green Bay. So I don't think he has major upside, but I do still think Cutler is a better play than Sanchez. And I want to take a step back really quick. I just want to mention some hint of optimism for Michael Floyd owners. Last 5 games, all with Palmer, the max percent of the team's targets he's seen in one of those games is 16%. So that's 5 straight games he never saw more than 16%. The previous 3 games were all with Drew Stanton. He saw 17%, 22%, and 28%. Those were two of his highest of the year and his 4th highest of the year. So when Stanton was playing, he was getting the high volume back early in the season. So at least it's a hint of optimism there, and it's enough for me to keep him on my bench.
Yeah, Mike Stanton goes by Giancarlo Stanton now. Baseball, what the heck is baseball? Anyway, yeah, that's very great information there. Another thing coming across the wire here, and this is sort of what we had expected, but Mike, I just want to get your take on this one as well as we're coming down. 12 minutes left in the show. Travis Kelce obviously is going to start against the Seahawks, a Seahawks team without Bobby Wagner again, with Anthony Fasano out. Does this do anything for Kelce? Are we actually going to see Kelce get maybe a full complement of targets in your opinion here? Are you bumping him up at all as a result of his role this week?
I am bumping him up a little bit, but a couple of things here. I mean, he was already seeing right around 20% of the targets. So what are you expecting? I mean, Rob Gronkowski and Jimmy Graham don't see 30%. I mean, how far do you want to go with this? So he's already pretty busy in the passing game. Also, they're going up against Seattle, who we know, everyone wants to beat on Richard Sherman, and he's overrated, which he's not. He's fantastic. But this is a defense that's still pretty darn good, and they also kind of knew Fasano was week long, so who are they going to scheme to stop? I mean, Dwayne Bowe has been extremely heavily targeted, but he hasn't been very good the last 2 years. They can handle him. Johnny Avery's out. A.J. Jenkins is out. They really don't have anything else. So they'll be looking to stop Charles, and they're really going to be looking to stop Kelsey. I mean, that's probably what they were thinking all week. And if they put two guys on him at times, he may end up being a huge bust. So I'm not quite as optimistic about him. I know others think this is the huge week, but I don't see it.
Interesting when you look close these target percentages, and that is intriguing. So something to keep in mind there if you're trying to make a decision between Kelsey and somebody like Larry Donnell or something like that. You might want to just stay with Donnell in that kind of situation. Question from Eddie here: Robert Griffin over Matt Ryan, and that's what our rankings are suggesting. He says, "Is this world really coming to this?" Really, the hate on Robert Griffin has gone entirely too far. I don't know how this all came about, but it's just a little silly to really think that this is that outlandish to want to start Griffin in a fantastic matchup over Matt Ryan in, well, maybe a decent matchup, but on the road in Carolina, a division rival, a tough game, never easy games between those NFC South teams. So I don't know if this is that outlandish to think, but do you guys have any varying perspectives here? Pat, toss it over to you. You said Griffin's a guy who we're trying to get in a lot of our daily leagues this week.
Yeah, I'm all in on Griffin this week. I mean, Ryan, like you said, he's got a good matchup, but you also mentioned he's on the road. So I certainly have Griffin ahead of him. Even in Werner, who's one of the few quality members of the secondary for Tampa Bay, is out, and so Cresdon Butler is going to be starting. The matchup screams Griffin, so there's really not much else to say. It's kind of a slam dunk for me.
And what about you, Mike?
Yeah, not much else to add. Definitely a great matchup here for RG3, and it's not like Pat said, it's not really close for me.
All right, what if we need a desperation quarterback play, and our choices are Sean Hill, Drew Stanton, and Ryan Mallett? What are we doing here? Obviously, Hill, in a situation where he could be down very quickly and may have to turn to the air. Stanton, obviously a tough matchup at home, and then Mallett we've already been over. Mike, if you had to throw a dart at one of those guys, who are you going with?
Definitely Hill here. I think he's going to be busy in garbage time. We see opponents of Denver running a lot of plays, and actually their pass defense has been giving up a lot of points over the last month or so. So I think Hill can do a lot. It's going to be mostly garbage time, but I think he'll rack up some points. Stanton and Mallett are playing Detroit and Cleveland respectively, both very good pass defenses, and in both situations may end up being kind of run-heavy games, especially Cleveland-Houston, which it could be both teams can end up running more than they pass, and it could be a 12-9 game. I mean, so I think Stanton and Mallett. Yeah, they're actually my last two ranked quarterbacks this week, so I don't really like either of those guys. Hill at least has some hint of potential garbage time damage.
Yeah, it is a very, very motley crew. But Pat, anything to add? It's pretty much Hill here, right?
Yeah, it's Hill. I mean, as long as he survives, the game. I mean, St. Louis can't protect anybody, whoever's starting a quarterback, and Denver obviously can get after the passer, but St. Louis is certainly not going to run the ball, so it's pretty much just going to be garbage time chucking.
We have a question dealing with this on Twitter here, hashtag War Room guys, dealing with this Houston game, and in some ways, we need three, or we have three choices. We need two out of the three: Andre Johnson, Pierre Garçon, Reggie Wayne in a PPR league. This is a sneaky week to play Andre Johnson. Everybody's down on Andre Johnson, but could we see Mallett potentially lean on him? You have to pick two of these guys: Andre Johnson, Pierre Garçon, Reggie Wayne. Mike, what are you doing in that situation?
I'm going Johnson for sure. He stands out. I mean, although Nuke Hopkins has been playing pretty well for the most part, Andre Johnson is still their number one wide receiver. He's still getting the number one slot there for the targets. Their number one receiver in snaps, targets, all that fun stuff. So I still like him even in a tough matchup against Cleveland. I mean, we don't really know who Joe Hayden's going to cover, but my best guess is that he's going to see both of them. I mean, they move those guys around to each side, so it's going to be pretty even. So I'm not too worried about that. And the other one is Reggie Wayne. I just don't see the upside with Garcon right now. I obviously it's a great matchup here, but other guys involved now that weren't there last year, Deshaun Jackson, Andre Roberts has seen an uptick in usage as well. Jordan Reed had a down week last week in the target department, but he's gonna bounce back as well. So I just don't see a major upside from Garcon, where Reggie Wayne in a shootout with New England has a good chance to find the end zone.
What do you think, Pat?
Well, I certainly have Wayne. He's not going to see very much of Revis, so you can probably get a lot of Arrington, who we should be able to handle, at least in a PPR league. He'll return some value. I certainly see it a lot closer than Mike between Garcon and Andre. I just like we've gone over. I don't trust Mallet, especially he's got no touch on short intermediate routes, and Hayden is a factor. But it's tough to choose Garcon over Andre. I probably would go with Andre and hold my nose and cross my fingers.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that. Just not the volume there for Garcon. So one other thing coming across the wire here too that I think is pretty interesting, just from a dime point, that Marquez Wilson is going to be active. He is going to be the number 3 wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. Promising player. Again, maybe you wish you would have seen him with the Chicago offense on an uptick, not a downtick, but still somebody to pay attention to. If he's out there, you're in a league where there's taxi squads especially, get this guy and toss him on that taxi squad if he's active and eligible for that taxi squad, because he does have some promise going forward for the Bears. Another question quickly, rest of the season, Mike, you have a tight end choice between Jordan Reed, Jason Witten, Vernon Davis. Only one of them for the rest of the season. Who are you going with?
Reed, Witten, and Vernon Davis. I'm going to scratch Vernon Davis off. He's just not getting goal line work. Obviously, if he starts getting that, things change. But for whatever reason, one of the best goal line end zone targets of the last decade, we'll see. Maybe ever. Not many guys are actually very good at that. Even Calvin Johnson struggles in that area. He's fantastic. He's just those looks for some silly reason. So he's off the list. Reed and Witten, a lot closer, but Reed just constantly beat up, and now Washington offense not quite as good. So I'm going to go with Witten there, who's been seeing an uptick in work the last couple weeks.
How about you, Pat?
Yeah, I agree with that. Witten is kind of having a little bit of resurgence here, and Dallas's schedule down the stretch is beautiful. I think Witten over Reed for a lot of the reasons Mike mentioned.
All right, very quickly, news coming across. It looks like I'm getting indication that Isaiah Crowell is going to start for the Browns today. Again, does this mean anything? Does this change our perspective? We're still going to see that three-headed monster. But, Mike, 3 minutes left in the show here. How are you processing this information really quickly?
I'm struggling with it a little bit. I'm definitely going to move him up a little bit, but I'm not going to go nuts here. West is not going anywhere. Even if Crowell comes out, gets the first 5 carries, he may be off the field for a whole quarter. So I wouldn't move him up a ton, but he has to be a borderline running back 2 option.
Yeah, it's an interesting move. I mean, if you were on the fence with Crowell or somebody else, then you're probably going to lean towards Crowell now in this situation. We've seen what he can do. He's probably the best pound for pound pure running back out of the 3, but it's all a matter of opportunity and a matter of volume, and I don't see the volume necessarily to be there to bump him way up in your rankings, but certainly something to note there. 2 minutes left in the show. Quick question, Denver running backs or Joyke Bell? So if you had your choice of Monte Ball, C.J. Anderson, Joyke Bell, for our buddy Phil on Twitter here, Mike, who are you going with?
Anderson starting. I'm not sure what sort of role we're going to see from Ball today, so I'm going with Anderson here. Obviously, in that offense, a lot more upside than Joyke Bell against Arizona.
Pat?
Absolutely. Anderson.
All right. John has a dynasty question. Gotta love to end the show with the dynasty. Marcus Wilson or Tavon Austin? Pat, your host.
I'm going to go with Marcus Wilson. I just think he has the higher upside. And you pull your hair out with Tavon Austin. Even I'll put my hair out with Tavon Austin.
Mike?
Man, it's really tough for me. I think that at some point maybe they could use Austin the right way, but I just don't think he's up for it. I just don't think he's very good. Where Wilson, maybe he does finally break out. I can't say the odds of that are very high, but probably better chances of him being a wide receiver too than there is for Austin. So I'd lean Wilson as well.
Agreed. Giles, our buddy, has one final question. Giles, you get the honor of being the last question here. He's going to drop Ronnie Hillman, like we said earlier. That's cool, but he's got best available between Reggie Bush, Bishop Sankey, D'Angelo Williams, Jerick McKinnon, or Carlos Hyde. Mike, are you picking up Sankey here, or are you picking up somebody else?
Easy call. Sankey's workload is up big time lately, and we obviously his big time speed, playmaking ability. He hasn't shown it yet a ton, but the workload's there, and I definitely go with Sankey here.
Yeah, he's a good DFS star. He's pretty cheap. In Pittsburgh, give it up on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to love him across the board this week. That's going to do it for us this week for Week 11. Best of luck to you. The playoffs are coming. 3 weeks left. So trim the fat, get those rosters polished up and ready to roll. We'll be back here again in Week 12 next week. Same time, same place. So until then, for Pro Football Focus, for Mike Clay, for Pat Thorman, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and that's a wrap.